Hey, what's going on guys, it's Krish here, and today I'm actually sitting in my theatre room on my simulator frame. So for a while now I've actually been wanting to do a few modifications to this thing, the first one being the handbrake. So this was my current setup. Basically I've got the G27 shifter still working with the G29 steering wheel and the G29 pedals. Now most of you that have the same setup, you know that none of these buttons actually work now that it's plugged into the G29, because most of these buttons are now on the actual steering wheel. So the way that this was set up previously, I've tapped into the circle button, and that actually connects to a momentary switch underneath this 3D printed cover. So when you lift the handle, it hits the momentary switch, which then goes and hits the circle button, and depending on your game, you would have assigned that to your handbrake button. Now to get that working for the G29, basically I'm going to be tapping into the R3 button. I find that I'm often assigning the R3 button to be the handbrake in different games, mainly because it's easy to access when you're trying to steer with one hand. It would have been great to tap back into the circle button, but I believe it's a bit more difficult with the new PCB. It's still probably possible, but I do know that it's quite easy to tap into the switch for the R3 and the R2 buttons, so that's what I'll be doing today. So the first thing you want to do is unscrew these 6 screws using a H4 Allen key. So once you've got your 6 screws off, we'll want to move to the back of the steering wheel, and here you'll find 6 Phillips screws that go right next to the paddle shifters. You'll want to use a small size Phillips screwdriver for that one, and basically you want to undo all 6 before the steering wheel will start to come out. Once the screws at the back are off, your wheel will be quite loose and it will want to come forward. So I'm having a bit of an issue with mine getting the wheel off. Where the red button is, it seems to be grabbing on somewhere, and there's not actually a screw there. So I might just gently try and pry it off with the flathead screwdriver. So what I actually found is there's a small clip there, so just be careful and keep that in mind when you're taking it apart. You'll just need to use a small flathead screwdriver and just try and push that part back while you pull it out. So I've just straightened the wheel back out just to show you this one. There's a plug there that you'll need to remove before the wheel can actually come out. And I thought I'd just mention, you might just be able to see it there. That's the switch for the PS3 and PS4. So just be careful of that when you're trying to take it apart. So now I'm just going to unplug that main PCB plug. Alright, so now I've got the wheel off. You can see the plug there that connected it all. So basically what I want to do is tap into the R3 button. And if you flip it around, you can see the contacts for the momentary switch are right here. So all you want to do is solder into either of these contacts. So you can either do 1, 2 or 3, 4. And then we'll have to find a way to route that cable back through the middle of the steering wheel and out the back of the housing. So I'll take this over now and solder in the wires. Okay, so what I've got here is the steering wheel. I've got my soldering iron, some solder, a hot glue gun, and I've also got some wire. So the wire that I'm using is just a 2-core cable. This was actually just some leftover wire. I've got about almost a meter length of it, and that's all I'm going to need for the time being. Basically, once this is all wired in, I'll be putting a plug on the other end so I can easily disconnect it if I need to. So the first thing you'll be wanting to do, guys, is just expose a bit of the wire, and basically we'll be tinning some of it just to get it ready for soldering onto the PCB. Now that you've tinned your wire, you just want to place them on the points where you'll be soldering them on, and applying heat so that the solder creates the connection. So here you can see the solder joints. They're not the prettiest, but they will do the job. Basically now what I'm going to do is get some hot glue and just glue around the wire and the solder joints just to keep it all in place. So as you can see, I've applied my hot glue now. I'm going to let that slowly cool down and form a bond. In that time, I'm actually going to go and get the rest of the steering wheel and basically see if I can open it up to run the wires through. So this is on the bottom of the actual steering wheel motor housing, and we've got a number of screws here that we need to take out. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Possibly even these two here, but we'll see when we get to there. So what I've discovered is that I need to actually take out this section, which is basically the mounting point for the steering wheel. This will also include the paddles. When you're removing this section, just remember to gently feed through the plug for the front PCB. Basically, once that section's off, it should lift up from the front and the top cover should come off like that. Here you can see the internal PCB for the motor control, the force feedback control. And what we need to try and do now is feed our wire through the front here where that plug was, and bring it all the way through to the back and get it out at one of the existing holes for the pedals and other things that plug into this. Or we may need to make our own hole here with a drill. So when we're feeding our wire back through, you just have to remember to make sure you thread it through here, otherwise you'll have some troubles when this doesn't fit on, as the other end of the wire's already been soldered on to the PCB. So we'll do that bit first. Make sure this is the right way around. I've just faced this towards the camera so it's easy to see. We need to thread it through the existing wire hole there. It's actually probably only about a 5mm in diameter hole, so make sure you pick your wire with that in mind. Okay, so I thought I'd do an update. It's been about an hour since the last bit that I was working on. So what happened was, as I mentioned before, be careful of your wire choice. Now this one I thought would be perfect, but actually it ended up being too thick, and only because of the sheathing that it's got here, the cover, that basically protects the two cores inside. Now I can still get it through, I can force it through, and what I'll do is, where it actually will be sitting permanently, that length of wire, I'm just going to remove the black sheet. That way it will have less friction when you're turning the steering wheel. It's quite fine when just the two cores are going through, but yeah, as soon as this comes along, it makes it a lot more difficult. So that's what I've been working on. I actually did forget to also mention, after you pass it through the paddles, you also need to pass it through this thing, which is the cover for the motors here, and then run it through the middle here. Just want to show how tight of a fitment the existing wire already is. You can see the hole itself is about 5mm, but once this wire is in there, you've only got about 3mm or so to play with. So just keep that in mind. So So what I've done here is I've taken off the 4 screws that hold the PCB in for the motor control, and also behind it there's actually a metal plate. I've also removed that for the time being. That let me actually pull through the wires a bit easier. And just under here there's a little section that I'm thinking of drilling a hole into. Basically you'll let the wires come out just at the front here. So I'm actually going to go and drill that now and pull the wires through, and then I'll slowly start and put everything back together. Okay, so now I've got the wires coming out of the steering box. I'm just going to start putting these things back together, and hopefully we'll be done very shortly. So now I've got the PCB back in place, and I'm slowly going to try and slide the back cover back on. It's a bit more difficult now because we've got this wire to deal with as well. I just need to make sure all of it lines up. I think I might actually just temporarily put a couple of the screws in the bottom one. This is basically just going to keep it all together while I finish it off. Now the way that I ran the wire through there, it should actually let me pull it through. Yep. So now what we need to do is just slowly flip it back over. You can see there that there's still some black sheath on the wire, but this whole section that's actually going to be running through the middle, I've removed it. Now I'm going to start by putting the paddle shifters back on. I just need to thread through the main PCB connector again. I'm going to put these screws back in. Okay, so I'm just putting the wheel back together now. I'm about to just put these screws in on the front. I had a bit of an issue with the way that I routed the wires behind here, right next to the R2 switch, and the way the plastic is back there, it was a really tight fit. I had to actually remove some of the hot glue just so that it was thin enough to clear that plastic. It's still not quite as flush as it should be, but I think once we screw it in, it should be fine. Okay, now the entire thing is back together now, and I just wanted to show where I've got my wires coming out. So it's right near where the other wires for the pedals and the shifter come out as well. So it'll be handy for cable management. So this is all screwed in, back together. I'm going to now go and mount this back onto the simulator frame, and I'll try and do a test. Basically, I won't hook this up today to my Handbrake, but I'm going to do a test to make sure that it does get registered in-game as being the R3 button. So I've got Dirt Rally up on the screen at the moment, and I've got the wires here, and as I make them contact, you can see that the R3 button lights up, and I remove contact, goes out, go again, and R3 turns on. So we know now that the wire that we connected up works fine. Now the only thing left for me to do is get behind the wiring for the handbrake that currently goes to the G27 shifter, probably snip it off somewhere halfway through, add a plug, put a plug on these new wires from the G29 wheel that we just tapped into, and connect it up. So I'll probably do that at some point tomorrow, and I'll probably do a review on how it works. Now the next thing that I actually want to do is get rid of this setup and probably purchase a cheap hydro setup so it's a bit more realistic. Alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Basically it was a rundown on how to tap into one of the wires on the G29 to use for external handbrake input. Be sure to keep an eye out for a future video where I actually might look at doing a hydro handbrake setup on the simulator. And if you have any questions, as always, leave it down below and I'll get back to you shortly. Thanks again for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one.